Hello and welcome to our audience. This is the PATC Podcast. I'm Mark Waterfield, President and owner of Public Agency Training Council. PATC is the country's largest and longest running provider of seminars for police officers, fire officials. We also have educators, EMS, dispatch individuals who attend our classes. And we've got a wonderful, wonderful guest here with us today, Darryl Rivers. And then I also have my co-host, Dave Broadway.
Hello, my name's Dave Broadway. I was a city cop for about 10 years. Then I was a special agent with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for 24. During the last 25 years, I've been teaching at a university adjunct and doing training for the last 8 years with PATC, and enjoyed my career and just love being a co-host with Mark to hear the interesting stories these instructors have.
Fantastic. And Darryl Rivers is with us. Darryl, please tell our audience about your background.
Right on. Well, I am Darryl Rivers. I spent majority of my life, my adult life, in government service. Started and I was 18, joined the United States military during the first Persian Gulf era. Right after that, at the tender age of 22, went and joined the Detroit Police Department in my hometown. Did that for several years before I decided that Detroit is a really good place to be from. Right. So I transferred out to Arizona, at which time I became a detective with the Department of Corrections there. Didn't like going to prison every day to go to work, so I became a special agent with the Attorney General's office, and I was in charge of the tobacco enforcement unit. Had about 100 non-sworn volunteer personnel that I managed there, and a few special agents for the tobacco enforcement unit. But I was still that Detroit kid that wanted to put on the uniform and save the planet, so I started all over at the Goodyear, Arizona Police Department, and there I served as a public information officer, defensive tactics instructor, sergeant, and a hostage negotiator. Those are a few things that I could think of that I did there. And I retired in 2014. Been instructing ever since. And I think a good portion of that was with you, Mark. A good 7 years now at PATC, at least.
Absolutely. We thoroughly enjoy having you as an instructor, and you do wonderful work. Tell the audience the classes that you teach.
Right on. Well, one of the more popular classes right now is a leadership class that we do, a Leadership Institute for New and First Line Supervisors. It's a 5-day, pretty intensive course. We talk about the levels of influence, recognizing where you are, not utilizing position, and climbing that influence and understanding how it works. Then we go into a little bit more of the actual everyday applicable things on how to deal with criticism. How to deal with challenging people, how to recognize it, how to create the proper leadership environment for your people. And that's a 5-day, pretty intensive course. The second most popular course is a de-escalation class that I call Calming the Fire. And it's not your typical verbal judo. It's not a cookie cutter. When they say this, you say that kind of thing. But it's more based on human cognition. So, I give them a crash course on human behavior analytics and let them know when a person's in crises within the first 30 to 45 seconds, you can recognize a person's personality type and de-escalate them based on their human behavior and cognition in that model of behavior. Those two classes are primarily the two that, I conduct most with you guys, Mark. And I also have an interview and interrogation class that, had some traction a while ago as well.
What type of students, what level of in their career do you typically have in your leadership class?
That's interesting because, I've had classes to where I had newly minted, sergeants. They're just getting into it or they're waiting to put their stripes on. And I've also had chiefs of police in that institute for new and first line supervisors. And I think it's applicable to everyone. It's just that I think the application is a little bit different from, the boots on the ground level to the executive level. Everybody picks out the particulars and applies it in their particular sphere. So yeah, I get, from beginnings levels to the actual, top of the mountain.
That's fantastic. What kind of practical exercises do you do in that class?
Oh, wow. I have one called Life Wheel. What it is that I'll create a circle. It's a wheel. And in there, I have 8 particular spheres, just areas of your life. Let's just say hypothetically, well, not hypothetically, family environment. What's your personal growth model? What's your health and wellness? What are your finances looking like? And I have them shade from the middle all the way to the top of the circle on how comfortable, how satisfied satisfied you are in that area. And generally it's all over the place, right? One's high, one's low, and one's medium, some are non-existent. And then I'll have them look at that wheel and say, so this is your wheel. We recognize that there are no complete circles. We're not all the way even across the board, which signifies that we have a little bit of personal and professional imbalances in our life. And I say, imagine taking that wheel off and replicating it and putting 4 of those tires all around your car. How bumpy is that ride? And everybody, no one has a complete circle. They say, oh, this is a pretty bumpy ride. I say, yeah. And if you're the leadership tier, you're the ones that got it together. You understand the technical knowledges of this job. You're competent in it, and you're leading the young individuals. If your ride is this bumpy, how bumpy is the person's ride who's coming to work every day, who's just learning how to navigate this new career? And when they are having that day, whether it's a not so great day, or maybe they're not motivated, maybe it's a possibility that their everyday bumpy ride is getting to them. And when you share that your ride is not bumpy and how you compensate and exercise specific disciplines, in your life, because we as humans malfunction extremely well, until we don't. Be mindful that I know you want a pair of hands, but you usually get the full person. So don't just look at them from a work perspective. Understand that everyone has a bumpy ride, including you, and how you navigate yours is how you should mentor other people to navigate theirs. And that's like big aha moment, really, really big aha moment with especially the high level managers and supervisors.
Well, Darryl, I got a little something for you. My area of passion is recruiting human intelligence, human sources, and things like that. And one of the things I talk about is Muhammad Ali as a boxer, as a technical boxer, and go all the way back to Gene Tooney. I said, the start of science in boxing and things like that, you can take it all the way back to Gene Tooney. And I said, go to YouTube and watch some of Ali's famous fights where he would fade being tired. He would fade, he just can't stand up. And then, of course, he would rope the dope and all the other terms that we have because of Ali's expertise. Right. And sometimes I tell people, when you talk to people, when you're trying to get into their heads, be conscious of your neuro-linguistic programming and things like that, how you're projecting. Yes. Is your face telling a lie while you're talking out of your mouth? Are you saying, man, it sucks to be you, or man, it really sucks to be
right.
you? These types of things. I think back, and when you said preparing and things like that, it made me think of one of my favorite quotes from Vince Lombardi was, everyone has the will to win, but few have the will to prepare to win. I
love that.
And these supervisors out there, and when I'm trying to talk to a guy on the street that's at his end wits, I need to let my face know that I'm concerned about this guy. And I've had old cops, and I'll get your comment on this. I've had old cops say, well, I'm not touchy-feely. I said, well, if you've been on a date, you're probably touchy-feely. You know how to project. I'll leave that with you, Darryl. But, on just projection, how important is that to you in your classes and what you've done in your career?
Absolutely. Projection is paramount. I think that, when we start talking about projection, we got to go into the dynamics of communication. We know that, it's 55% express body language, 38% tonality and word usage. It's 7% vocal. So if I have a whopping 93% of body language, tonality, and word usage, and how I say what I say, it's going to completely outweigh that 7%, right? And so therefore, I use this sentence a lot when I'm teaching communication. I can say the same sentence 3 ways and mean something completely different. I can say, Dave, I didn't know, or I didn't say you stole my bike. Or, Dave, I didn't say you stole my bike. Dave, I didn't say you stole my bike. It's the same sentence 3 different ways. And just that projection gives you a completely different emphasis on what you're paying attention to. So, it goes back to when I teach the de-escalation classes or the leadership, as opposed to, like you say, hey, man, what were you thinking when you made that decision? Or, hey, man, what were you thinking when you made that decision? Completely. Absolutely. So, I do talk about the NLP, tonality, body language, that the projection is extremely important. Not only do you teach them how to properly project, but when you're instructing a class, you got to properly project.
Yes, and also tell them, get over yourself. If you've been successful in a promotional board, if you've been successful in your love life, if you've got a core of good friends, you know what you're doing. You just choose not to do it because you've prejudged a group or a person that wasn't worthy of your full communication.
Exactly. And another thing I say, Dave, is that I think that when you are a high level communicator, you feel you're extremely effective in communication. One of the things you have to understand is that the person with the lowest level of communication skills basically dictates the communication, because you have to be able to communicate with them on their level to where communication actually happens. So regardless of how skilled you are, if you want to communicate on a high level, you have to be able to recognize where is the person that you're communicating with. Because if I'm communicating at an
Nicely said.
extremely high level and this person is a mid-grade communicator, it sounds very good and I'm using $100 words and I'm expressing myself, but if they can only understand it at a point to where they can, it doesn't matter how intelligent your speech is, they're going to translate it and reproduce it on a level that they can comprehend.
Well, that sounds like a good segue into your verbal de-escalation work. Tell our audience about that class.
Well, great. It actually is one of my favorite classes to teach. Coming from a hostage negotiator's perspective, and the main thing, Mark, is I always say, "Man, I wish I knew this stuff when I was working in Detroit." I could have saved myself a lot of hospital visits. A lot of ibuprofen and Vicodin, and I could have saved myself a lot of that because man, it was something else. But if you have an apple tree, an orange tree, strawberry patch, coconut grove, and grape vineyard, if you treat all of them the same, some of them will die, right? So when it comes to human behavior and de-escalation, if I try to use one technique on every single individual I come across, I'm going to get my uniform pretty dirty, and I'm going to be using a lot of paperwork for my use of force documentation. So we realize that different people are different people. The main thing is recognize what personality style that you are. Am I a driven person? Am I more influential? Am I systematic? Am I analytical? Because that's the way I'm going to try to de-escalate. If I'm extremely analytical, I'm going to always come from the logical perspective. And we know emotional people aren't logical. If I am extremely driven, I'm going to try to dominate the conversation and I'm going to tell them what's right and I'm going to tell them what they need to do and I'm going to constantly go at them in that particular ideology because that's my model of behavior. So first is recognizing who and what you are concerning your particulars when you're under crises of stress. You squeeze the sponge, what's in is going to come out. That's including us as officers. And then the second part is recognizing who do I need to become to obtain the desired result, right? So now I have to recognize who I am and I got to recognize who's in front of me. And then the whole course is now talking about bridging that gap. So let's just say I'm a dominating type of personality type. I'm extremely driven. And the individual that I'm attempting to de-escalate is a supportive, systematic person, meaning that they don't express their feelings as much. They more so are listeners and they're more so a supporter. So me being driven, I'm going to dictate a lot of things, but that person that's systematic, they're going to more so listen. And I don't know if I have agreement or not. So I can say, hey, you do believe that this is a good decision to make for us to just, take a deep breath, step out on the porch. We don't want to mess up your parents' house or anything like that. And we've already caused enough issues as it is right now. And I really want to talk to you man to man. I don't want to degrade you in front of your family or you feel a certain way. Let's step outside on the porch. And now I can say that to certain people, but let's just say I'm talking to that person is systematic and they're kind of non-emotional. They don't give me a lot of feedback. I said a whole bunch and I didn't give that person that opportunity to actually express themselves. So I think I have an agreement. I think we're going to walk out on the porch and they're like, I'm not going out there. They say, well, but you didn't say anything. Yeah, I know. But if I'm dealing with a systematic person and I recognize that they're not as expressive, they'll hold their emotions in a little bit. I'll say, well, hey, where do you feel we need to conduct this conversation at? Where's best for you? As opposed to being that driven person that's just going to dictate, I have to come back and realize this person is systematic. They're not going to express themselves. They're going to hold their anger in. Before you know it, I'm going to get sucker punched because they're straight faced and they're not bucking up at me and, showing me signs of aggression. So now I'm more inquisitive as opposed to directive. And just that de-escalation of understanding who I'm actually de-escalating is going to increase my effectiveness by at least 80%. You gotta treat the plants the way that they need to be treated or they're gonna die.
And also, Darryl, I try to teach young police officers that, and those in the academics, I try to tell them the people in the street are fascinating.
Yeah.
Hear their story and let your face tell them that you are
Yeah.
listening. Don't keep it in. It's like the 7% communication. So bravo for that. I appreciate what you just said. And another guy that's been in uniform, yeah, we can talk the talk.
Yes.
So we've been there. We failed.
Yes,
We've
very
been there.
much so.
There have been so many instances and even recent instances of communication breaking down. And I think it's vitally important that we present your class and that you're out there as much as possible teaching officers how to have better results and to de-escalate situations. It's very, very important. That's for sure.
It definitely is. And, even though, and I tell them all of the time, I say, look, just because you're taking my de-escalation class doesn't mean that you're never going to fight again. I'm telling you what, number one, I am not that good. You're not going to take this class and never fight again. All right. So, I do express that if you use these particular techniques, if you use the body language cues I'm going to give you, the tonality, and the process, even when the time arises to whereas that one person decides what you're saying is great, but I'm still going to fight you, you have now documentation that you exercise the most professional way of communicating. So in the event that there has to be a hands-on, you're so justified in it, if there's any recordings or anything like that, that you did not utilize violence as the first option, and that you did your best and you did a particular process that shows my number one option is to resolve this in a non-confrontational manner.
Absolutely.
Tell
us about your interview class. What kind of things do you talk about there?
Oh, wow. We go so much into cognition. We really talk about how we process information. For instance, Mark, let's just say if I want to connect with you, and my number one goal is to begin to build rapport. And I'll tell them from the get-go, if your number one goal is to get a confession, you're going to be hard pressed. If your number one goal is to build a relationship and rapport, the confession is going to come. So my number one goal is to build a rapport with you. And that goes with something as small as communicating in the way and in the manner that their brain processes information. So let's just say that you and I are speaking, Mark, and on the way out, we're saying goodbye, but we're not using the words goodbye. What would be the words? What would be the statement or phrase you would use other than goodbye?
So long.
So long. Okay, give me another one.
See you later.
Right? So when you say so long or see you later, let's just use see you later. That's more applicable, right? So when Dave says see you later, what that lets me know is that Dave is a visual person. He processes information visually. So if I say see you later, he probably says when he's speaking, you see what I'm saying? Or I see what you mean. I see that. To whereas if I'm audio, I would say talk to you later. Oh, I hear what you're saying. Do you hear what I mean? So I'll use either I hear what you're saying. Do you hear what I mean? I see what you're saying. I see what you mean. Or if I'm kinesthetic hands-on, I'll say something like so long, or let's keep in touch. So that person will say, do you feel me? Do you feel what I'm saying right now? So it's either see, hear, or feel. So when I'm talking to the person and I recognize that they're using one of those particular items, now all of my questions are going to be visual. So what did you see? Because if I ask what did he hear, that's not on the top of the way his brain processes information. So if I want to get the highest level of information, I have to connect with them cognitively on how their brains connect with the outside world. So if it's primarily visual, I'm going to use a lot of visual statements. And also the visual person likes to complete your sentences before you complete them. So if I'm talking to Dave and I know that Dave visual, I say, Dave, in the event that you, I, and maybe two or three, and Dave's like, you're talking too slow. Get it out. I want to hear it, right? Because that person's a visual. So if I recognize that visuals communicate at a faster pace than kinesthetics, I want to communicate at that pace of that visual because it gives them less stress in their brain. Yeah. So I'm connecting just with the way that they process information by listening to how they speak to me. That's just one. I go into the NLP of involuntary eye movement. What's the creative side of the brain? What's the recollection side of the brain? A lot of body language. We even talk about the initial walk-in, to where it's when you shake a person's hand, how you can begin to set the tone of how you want the interview to go just by shaking their hand a certain way. So it's very cognitively based, to where it's the way that you form up your questions, to understanding your personality type. If I am an influential person that doesn't like conflict, I'll say things like, if I pull a car over, hey, you don't have anything inside of the car that I should know about, do you? That's non-confrontational. It makes a person easier to lie to you. They just got to agree with the lie that you've already told, as opposed to, is there anything in the vehicle that I need to know about? Do you have any guns inside of the car? Instead of saying, you don't have that, do you? Because the brain has to go to a certain part of it to provide that answer. And the way you ask it is going to elicit a whole lot more physiological responses.
And you have
That's
regional
so fantastic.
things too. Yeah.
And you're a wonderful instructor, and we very much cherish our relationship with you. The audience, the attendees always come back very thrilled that they had your class and learn learn a whole lot. And so, Darryl Rivers, we really appreciate you being here with us on this podcast and appreciate all of your work for PATC.
Well, Mark, I appreciate you guys. Definitely value the relationship, and how we've been over the past few years. Every time we're in the same area, man, you make it an effort to come and hang out with me, and I really appreciate that.
David, Darryl, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your
Thank you
week.
guys so much.
Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to email us at patcpodcast1@gmail.com.
1